Okay, so what I've done is some screen captures of the website because I'm way the hell out here with no reception. I'm just going to go down the 460 page and mention particular topics that you should cover in your report. The purpose for this video is to go through a list of things that you should have in that report, whether it be the written one that you're going to send in or whether you do it in the video, okay? We'll talk about length later. Just look at the topics, okay? So, types of opportunities, whether it's market development, product development, or market penetration, or diversification. That's one of the things you should just spend a couple sentences on. But you should talk about the thing that you picked from the company. Remember, most of you picked medium and large size companies, like Bombardier's. You're not going to talk about the whole company. Just talk about one division, like snow machines or airplanes. And then what you'll do is you'll say, okay, at this particular point in time, they've been selling to all the other companies that could possibly be customers in Canada and USA, and now they got to go overseas. So you'll talk about whether you're discussing market penetration or market development or product development, coming out with a totally new product. Like you might be talking about Canada Goose and saying, you know, everybody who wanted a coat's got a coat. Now we're going into mitts and scarves and things like that. Okay, so you mentioned that very briefly, right? Then you talk about globalization, some aspects of how that may or may not have affected the company. You could take the name of the company and type in the word globalization to see if you can find a news story about that. Then you also talk about the physical geographic environment and how weather extremes have affected the company. And if you can't find something directly, then you can make an inference. You could say, well, this company had a very large manufacturing plant in country A, which was affected by a typhoon at this particular date, and it slowed down construction or supply chain, etc. Contingency planning. Now, you won't find something specific about contingency planning. What you'll find is a discussion of some kind of risk, threat, scenario, or something that went wrong, and were they able to recover quickly or not. That will be an indication if they had a risk management policy and if they had some contingency plan or business continuity. Sources of information, yeah, government associations and the company webpage. Now, the other thing I want you to do is make sure that you try as much as possible to find out anything that they may have done regarding Canadian government sources like an embassy or a consulate. For example, if it's a Canadian company doing business in China, did they go through the Canadian embassy in Beijing? Now, you may not find that explicitly, but you can make an inference if you went on to the website for the Canadian embassy in Beijing and found out that they're a member of the Board of Trade, of the Canadian Board of Trade in China, or they're a member of the Canada-China Trade Council or something like that. Here's another thing a lot of people don't bother doing. Googling the name of the company president and CEO and seeing what that shows up under different topics. Diplomatic posts, cultural environment, social cultural environment. You should have somebody mention something about that. Okay, let's go back up to in the January section. Okay, Hofstede, Canada-U.S. relations. Right, going down here, ethics and bribery. Okay, so corporate social responsibility. Was there anything about the company that was involved in an ethical situation or any type of whistleblower circumstance or any type of situation where there was some kind of obstructionist situation or defensive thing, or were they accommodative about something, or were they completely proactive? Stakeholders. You can mention briefly who would be the main stakeholders. Now, viral marketing. You could go into YouTube and find if there's any kind of really, really cool videos they use as part of marketing, which would reflect their understanding of viral marketing and the promotional mix. Cultural appropriation. We talked about the marketing. Oh yeah, marketing orientation for international business. I've got a video there which I'm going to send a link to you to watch again. We got product orientation, sales orientation, marketing orientation. But I also made a video talking about the marketing orientation for international business, and you should watch that again because that's something you should make comments on. Okay, government influence on trade, protectionism, trade barriers. So that involves going up to the very top here on section tariffs, subsidies. So what you do is you go into Google and put the name of the company and then the word tariff and then news and see if there's any kind of tariff that got raised or increased that negatively affected them. You could type in the word subsidy and find out if they received any government subsidies. Just gotta check to see a Ranger's being a good boy. He's just lying down there. Okay, what else we got here? Now, the World Trade Organization, any kind of dumping situation. What else we got here? Foreign exchange. Now, I haven't taught you yet because we didn't have a class for this about how foreign exchange affects companies. But what you can do is click on that link that says foreign exchange market and read about some of the basic information and make some commentary on it. Usually what you'll find is if you go to the company's annual report, at the very, very end, they'll talk about things that affected the company's return on investment this year, or productivity, or financial effectiveness, or whatever. And usually they'll mention something in there about a foreign currency exchange advantage or disadvantage. IMF, World Bank, well, the World Bank and the IMF and the World Health Organization, all those national and international non-governmental organizations are getting a lot of flack these days. I hadn't yet taught the class about the IMF and the World Bank. But the reason why we talk about that in a course like this is because sometimes what the IMF does in order to help out a country with its currency exchange rate situations is provide some assistance through the provision of goods and services, or information, or so on. And there may be opportunities for Canadian companies to be involved in that. Same thing with the World Bank. The World Bank doesn't necessarily give money to a country that had a hurricane. What they do is they give money to an entity that's going to then rebuild a bunch of schools or hospitals in the country that had the hurricane. Political risk, personal risk, business continuity, disaster recovery. That's something you should obviously mention for several paragraphs. Now, there's a whole section here on Canadian government stuff which I hadn't taught to you about Canadian government agencies like the CBC, SA, Canadian Border Services Agency, EDC, Export Development Corporation, Department of Foreign Affairs, and so on. You should read that. Why export, proactive reasons, reactive reasons, choice of entry modes. Now, this will be probably one of the biggest sections in your report or your video that you're going to make. You're going to talk about collaborative arrangements the company had. You're not going to have examples of all of them, but you may certainly have an example of direct exporting, maybe an example of contract manufacturing, say in the case of Canada Goose or Air Canada. A turnkey operation is a joint venture. Many companies have a joint venture in order to be able to understand the social, cultural target market segmentation. Many oftentimes they'll have a joint venture or a strategic alliance, and if you read that description and the video, they'll explain those. Now, here's another one they'll talk about. I'm just going to divide this video in half because I don't want it to be too long.